Good morning. I'm Rhonda Sims, Associate Commissioner in the Office of Assessment and Accountability. It's my pleasure to welcome you to day 2 of Kentucky's Technical Advisory Committee. We had an excellent conversation yesterday, so we're so appreciative of the expertise and experiences that our committee brings to our work here in Kentucky, and very appreciative of our partners that were also presenters yesterday. We'll have a number of vendor partners joining us today. And since we do have some new folks, we want to take just a moment or two to do some introductions and also some key reminders that we are in an open meeting environment. So I'm going to turn to Kevin O'Hare, who got us started yesterday and who's done a lot of organization for the meeting. Again, a special thank you to the OAA team for all of their support yesterday, and Brian for your facilitation. So Kevin, I'm going to turn it over to you to let you do some key reminders, and then we'll turn it over to Brian for facilitation and introduction of the committee.
All right. Well, thanks, Rhonda. And good morning, everyone, and welcome back for day 2 of our Kentucky Technical Advisory Committee meeting. Decided to return today. I know that yesterday was a cold day, and today is looking to be above freezing. So I'm glad that folks decided that they still wanted to come back and meet with us today and hear all the good conversation we have in store. So like yesterday, I look forward to some wonderful discussions, some great topics from our presenters from Pearson today, and just overall another successful day. But before I hand the meeting over to Brian, to review our agenda for today, as a reminder from yesterday, I want to go over some of the expectations for conducting virtual meetings, and just the overview of the meeting complying with the requirements of the Open Meetings Act. Accordingly, KTAC members must ensure their video is streaming at all times and they can be seen throughout the duration of the meeting. Committee members, please mute your microphone when not talking. However, all discussions must be broadcast to the public. So when you do speak, make sure that you're not on mute. Every time you speak during the meeting, please unmute your mic, state your name, and take a short pause just in order to give the technology time to recognize you before you start your conversation. Make sure to silence or turn off other electronic devices that may cause disruption to your sound feed. Minutes from yesterday and today's meeting will be taken and shared with the general public on the KDE website once they've been made available. In addition, our regulation KRS 1586455 requires that the department submit reports regarding the advice and recommendations of this committee to the Office of Education Accountability by July 1st and December 1st of each year. So, Brian, I think that covers the necessities for today so now I think it's time to hand things over to you and to get things started. So thank you all.
Thank you, Kevin. I'm Brian Gong from the Center for Assessment. I'm the facilitator for the Kentucky Technical Advisory Committee. We're grateful to have all the members of the advisory committee with us today, and I'll ask each of you to just briefly introduce yourselves again as we start the meeting. Let me ask you to go in the order that I have you on my screen. So Pete, if you could be first, and then Elena, Corinne, Suzanne, and then Phoebe.
Good morning. I'm Pete Goldschmidt. I'm a professor at California State University, Northridge. Thank you.
Good morning. My name is Elena Diaz-Balolo. Nice to be here, and I'm with the University of Colorado Boulder.
Hi, I'm Corinne Huggins-Manley, and I'm from the University of Florida.
Good morning. I'm Suzanne Lane, and I'm Professor Emeritus from the University of Pittsburgh.
Hi, I'm Phoebe Winter. I'm an independent consultant in measurement and educational research in Richmond, Virginia.
Thank you. We also have people who are joining to present and hear the KTAC discussion from contractors. We'll ask you to introduce yourselves at the beginning of your agenda items in just a minute. Our agenda today consists of 3 main topics. The first is about equating, a presentation of the current post-equating procedures and a discussion of possible pre-equating plans. The second main topic is about scoring for constructed response items, both how it's currently done with a mixture of human and AI scoring, and the quality control criteria and procedures for. And our last agenda item is a review of the documentation for the accountability performance standard setting that was conducted this past fall. Are there any suggestions for changing the suggested agenda? If not, we'll go ahead and start with our first topic, which is the a review of the 2023 post-equating results, and then a discussion about future possible pre-equating plans. That's going to be led by Li-Kun Ho from Pearson. Li-Kun, if you could introduce yourself and any colleagues that might be accompanying you today, we appreciate it.
Sure, thanks, Brian. Good morning, everyone. My name is Li-Kun Ho. I'm Senior Research Scientist and Lead Psychometrician for KSA program at Pearson. Today, I'm going to present the 2023 data results, post-equating procedure, and discuss the potential future pre-equating plans. I'm going to take control of the presentation. Trying to find my presentation.
Go ahead and skip forward, Li-Kun, to probably slide 42.
Slide 42.
Oh,
Yeah.
Slide 42. Thank you. Okay. So before I get started, I just want to move the questions to tag to the beginning of the presentation. So today, as part of the discussion today, we're going to review the 2023 post-equating procedures and results and discuss the future pre-equating plans. So some guiding questions to tag, we want to ask tag member to share any feedback regarding the IRT item parameter updates, and ask KTAC members about any feedback on post-equating evaluations, options 1 and 2 that I'm going to present today. And if you have any guidance about how to evaluate the item level and test level comparisons between the pre-equated and post-equated analysis plan. We also would like to hear about any recommendations for criteria that we can use to determine whether we should implement the post-equating scoring tables or the pre-equating tables. We want to hear about your recommendations about the evaluation criteria or guidelines to move to the pre-equating models. So there are two major parts in this presentation. First, I'm going to briefly review the 2023 psychometric analysis summary. That will include the calibration evaluation, the 2023 post-equating results, and the student performance comparison with the 2022 results. The second part following is to discuss the potential pre-equating plan, share our thoughts and ideas on post-equating options and subsequent decision criteria. So before I dive into these two parts, I would like to briefly review the test design and analysis specification for Spring 2023 KSA administration. Spring 2023 administration marks the second administration of the KSA. Each of the 6 summative assessments not only provides the overall scale scores and performance levels, but also provide the subdomain scores from group of items that measuring the skills within the overall content domain. For on-demand writing, each test form includes a single writing prompt scored on 5 to 6 traits. So for grade 5, we measure 5 traits, and for grade 8 and 11, we measure 6 traits on on-demand writing. The guiding testing design principles are driven by we want to shorten the testing time for students, and we also want to report not only the individual student scores, but also provide the field with aggregate level subscore reporting. So for each assessment, we use multiple test forms with a mixing of items across the forms designed to provide the group level subscore information. Because we selected items for release every year, including 2023, their embedded field test items are included in the operational forms, except for the science and on-demand writing, in order to maintain the size of the item pool. In addition, when we construct the core operational forms for spring 2023, the effort was made to aim minimum number of score points to be 10 per reporting category in order to maintain the reliability. The anchor items used for post-equating this year were from the operational items that were administered in 2022. So the anchor item pool include the items appeared both across the core operational forms, also anchor back to the 2022 to support the scale stability. So this test design allows us to report more robust aggregate level subscores. And after we use the calibration and post-equating estimate the theta scores, we then transform the theta score of students through a linear transformation into the scale score. This follows a similar manner to how K-prep was transformed, although it's within a different scale score range. And the same linear transformation applies to both overall scale scores and subdomain scale scores. So consistent with the baseline year of 2022, we use Rush model and generalized partial credit model to generate ability score for the overall test and subdomains on each test form. Because of the low panelist participation rates in spring 2022 standard setting meeting, standard validation meeting was conducted in spring 2023 to review the performance level CAS scores. And in all instances but one, the updated CAS score recommendations were consistent with the 2022 established CAS scores. Because of this very high consistency with the current CAS scores, the decision is made that all CAS scores remain the same as 2022 ones. And after we the calibrated the ability score for the overall test forms and subdomains, we use the same transformation to derive both overall and subdomain scale scores. And for spring 2023, the test participation is comparable to spring 2022. The sample that we used for post-equating is representative of the testing population. Before we do the calibration and post-equating process, we computed the classical item analysis to check the item statistics and review them, see if there's any possible miscase. The necessary rescoring process was conducted to ensure all item scores were corrected. Then we conducted the concurrent calibration per grade level for each subject. The range of item parameter estimates is reasonable. There's no extreme values found, and the standard errors of B parameter estimates are reasonably small. Overall, the item fit is good. There are some subject and grade level 1, 2, 3 operational items showing large outfit values, which is greater than 1.5. We ask content specialists to review those items, and those items were retained for post-equating and operational scoring. And you can find the list of items with large outfit values in the attached psychometric analysis summary report for additional detailed information. So for post-equating procedures, we basically divide into 2 methods. For reading, math, science, social studies, and editing mechanics, we use a common items non-equivalent group design. Because the anchor sets were expanded to all 1 point and 2 points item administered in spring 2022, we used the robust Z procedure, but with a little bit more strict anchor item stability check, which means the linking item with the largest absolute robust Z value is removed from each iteration until no such items are left in the anchor set, or we already removed 20% of the linking items. And at the end of this iteration process, we also checked the ratio of the standard deviation within the 0.9 to 1.1 range, and the correlation of the anchor item parameter estimates greater than 0.95. For on-demand writing, because each test form includes single writing prompt, so there are no common items across the writing test forms. Common items, non-equivalent group designs cannot be used for here. The students either took the anchor forms, which are intact forms that were administered in 2022, or the new forms, non-anchor forms. However, since the forms were randomly assigned to students through a spiral process, we can make assumption that the student groups who took each writing form have the same ability distribution. Therefore, we use the equivalent group design for on-demand writing post-equating procedures. And the equating constant for each non-anchor form is calculated as the average anchor stability, which is our target stability for that grade level, minus the non-anchor form average stability through the initial calibration. We then added this constant to the initial calibrated item parameters for the non-anchor form to center the non-anchor form on the anchor forms. So for each iteration, we conducted this anchored item calibration for the new form with adjusted item parameters. Once the average difference between the non-anchor form stability and target stability is within the acceptable range, which is less than 0.001 difference, we stop the iteration. So throughout the psychometric post-equating process, we conducted the QC process for each checking point. Pearson and Homerl compared the following outputs for each step during the process, including the initial calibration item parameters, linking item stability check, final equated item parameters, and raw score to theta conversion tables check. We make sure that at each checking point, there is a 100% match between Pearson and Homerl results. Here's a summary of anchor item stability check for all subjects except for on-demand writing. So recall the guidelines of removing the linking item from the post-equating process is to remove the linking item with the largest robust Z, assuming it is greater than 1.645, until there are no such linking items exist in the pool to purify the anchor set, or we already removed 20% of the anchor set. And at the end of stability check process, we also check the ratio of the standard deviations and correlation to make sure that both of the criteria are within the range. So I want to point out that the initial linking set contains a large portion of the total operational items in 2023. And the unstable anchor items only consist a very small portion of this initial linking set. So which means most of the pre-selected anchor items have no significant item parameters draft. So this serves as a baseline information, help us understand whether it is reasonable to think about the pre-equity model in the future. This is the iteration summary of the average theta scores for on-demand writing test forms. Recall that for on-demand writing, we use equivalent group design for the post-equating. So for each grade level, we have 2 anchor forms, which were used to calculate the target thetaability, and 2 new forms. And the new forms thetaability were adjusted using the equating constant calculated by the initial ability, average ability, and the target thetaability. Make sure that the final thetaability of non-anchor forms are within the range of the target thetaability. So after the post-equating process was completed, we also conducted the historical analysis to compare the 2023 student performance with the 2022 baseline student performance. So as we can see that for each subject area, the distribution of performance level were comparable between the 2022 and 2023. So for math, we do see a slightly reduction of the level 3 and level 4 performance on high school. For science, similar trend as math. Social studies is comparable, consistent with 2022. And for editing mechanics, a little bit reduction on the level 4 percentage between of the 2023 compared to 2022. And this is the on-demand writing distribution performance levels. So I will pause here to see if there's any questions from the TAC members before I move on to the second part to discuss the pre-equity model. Phoebe?
Yeah, I'm trying to understand the linking items. There are so many of them, as you said. You know, a lot of them were. Did you have? You had room for field test items as well?
Yes, except for science and on-demand writing. For the other subjects, we had embedded field test items included in each operational forms.
Okay, and so these linking items, are they, so for example, on reading grade 3, there are 52 linking items. I'm sorry, this would be, this is table 4 in the report. And those 52 items were distributed across different operational forms? Okay, that makes it, that's beginning to make sense. The other question I have was whether there was a content review. A lot of items were dropped proportionally, it seems to me, and whether there was a content review of those items before they were dropped, or was it just statistical criteria used?
So the criteria to drop the anchor items are statistically basically driven by the robust Z value. Although those items are dropped from the anchor pool, they were retained in the operational scoring process. So basically, their parameters are freely estimated, but with the final anchor item set item parameters fixed so that we can scale all the anchor item parameters onto the baseline scale.
Okay, yeah, and I did understand that, but was there any content review of the items that were dropped before the final decision was made? But from what you're saying, it's totally statistical. The items weren't sent to content reviewers to see if, or was there any, so for example, this didn't happen, I'm sure. The 7 items in grade 3 could potentially have all been from one standard. I'm sure they weren't because that's not the way the world works, but were any kind of content criteria established to say that, you know, only 2 items per standard could be deleted?
That we didn't conduct it for 2023, but we can send you the detailed information about the dropped anchor item standard coverage. So one thing we are sure is the items dropped from the initial anchor set were not from the single domain. They are spread across the standards, the blueprint coverage, so that the final anchor set are still representative of the overall standard coverage. So for example, the 7 dropped anchor items for reading 3, that was not just from the key ideas, but spread out across the 3 standard coverage.
Thank you.
Yep. I think Corinne is the next one.
Thank you. Corinne Huggins Manley here. I actually had the same question as Phoebe, so that was helpful. With one kind of addition, on your full report, you separated items by their type, right? Multiple choice, technology enhanced, short answer, multiple select. Is that taken into account? Is the anchor items equivalent there? Did you look when you dropped that you didn't kind of lose all of your multiple select or something?
Yes. So after we dropped the anchor item based on the robustity criteria, we did check the item type coverage of the final anchor set. We didn't check the content, so I didn't include the content coverage table for the anchor set in the final report, but we can provide that additional information to the TAC members.
Thank you.
Thanks. Suzanne? I'm sorry, you have your own muted.
This is Suzanne Lane. These questions were helpful, and I had the same question regarding items being dropped from the same standard or same content area. But I guess I'm having trouble trying to figure out why you need to use so many anchor items. I think it's good, but to have, how many forms were there? Did you mention the number of forms per grade for a particular content?
Yes, for reading, social studies, we have 2 core forms per grade level. For math, because there's many content coverage, we want to use a matrix design. So for math, there are 4 core forms per grade level. And the number of anchor forms showing here is across forms, the overall count of anchor items. So for example, the math grade 3, we have 68 unique operational items across all core forms. And out of these 68 operational items, the 60 items were selected as initial set of anchor items. And the decision was made is because when we conducted the standard validation, we use the impact data from last year. And we want to make sure that the scale stability is a maximum between the 2022 and 2023. Therefore, we want to make sure that the item parameters won't change to the largest extent. That's why we want to expand the anchor set to the initial, the smaller portion of anchor operational item to this largest set of anchor items.
Thank you.
Phoebe, I see you have your hands up.
Yeah, I'm just thinking for the future, it would be really useful to see the full forms design, so that you could show all four math forms and then show the standards, and within, color coding or something like that, other people who do it much better, which ones are anchor and which ones are operational. Just because, and then which ones get dropped, just because this is a pretty complex design, and at first blush, reading in the report. So, for example, it said there were 87% of the items remaining and 7 anchors were dropped. And I'm going, wow, that's 53 items. That's a lot of items for a 3rd grade anchor, without thinking about that's 2 test forms and how those are distributed. And also be good to see the number of items that are common across the forms, or if the forms are unique, just all that that will help us, help you guys evaluate what you're doing. But thank you. This was a lot of good information too, and you explained it well, so I appreciate that. I still think that before any item is dropped, it should go to content review to make sure, and to always err on, I know you were really looking at stability, wanting to be very stable this year, but in the future, perhaps to err on the side of including the anchor item rather than excluding it if content finds no issues with it. So for example, I feel awful about this, but let's say there's an item about a pandemic on the test, and it's anchor, it changed. Then the content might go, well, we just had a pandemic, so kids are probably answering things differently, and you could drop that item. But if there's an item about dogs, and there's been nothing about dogs happening in the news, and dogs hasn't been the cover, the core of some reading test or something like that, then content might say, there's no reason to exclude it. That's my preference, is to go with the content.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. I think that's a great idea. We will for sure to include those the detailed information on the content coverage for our future report and presentation, and we will always revisit our the post-equating procedure for 2024. Alina, I see your hands up. Yeah. You're on mute.
My apologies. I wanted to echo what Phoebe said, and I think if that could be a whole TAC recommendation, I think that would be great. I can't imagine that any of us would feel differently from that in terms of the content piece. I just had a quick question about the robust-Z, because I think many other states as well kind of do other types of checks as well. So not just the robust-Z, but they think about, well, let's take a look at, say, the weighted root mean square difference, or so taking a look at other measures as well to kind of triangulate. And not that that's necessarily going to give you all the answers, but I think it's just a nice way to ensure that you're looking across different types of metrics and not just relying upon one. So just something to perhaps think about.
Yes. There are different criteria that we can use in the post-equating procedure. Some other states, they also use displacement value, which we can also take into consideration into further update our post-equating procedure. If there's no further questions, I'm going to jump into the second part of the pre-equating model discussion. So during this summer's planning meeting, the interest in the pre-equating model was emerged, and there are some preconditions we have to think about to move to the pre-equating model. First of all, we need to have reliable item statistics, preferably obtained from embedded field test or operational test data, and that are from the sufficient number of students who are motivated and representative of testing population. And we also need to have a post-equating evaluation plan as part of the pre-equating model to check whether the pre-equating model is feasible or not. For example, we need to conduct the item drift analysis to check the item stability. We need to compare the pre-equated and post-equating scoring tables. So for today's presentation, I would like to discuss some possible decision criteria for consideration as part of this plan. So when we move to the pre-equating model, we need to think about how we evaluate the stability of that model. Therefore, we need to conduct the post-equating evaluation. And to conduct the post-equating evaluation, first of all, we need to define the criteria to select whether to select the post-equating or go to the pre-equating model prior to the administration. And there are some considerations from the reporting logistic overview. For example, if our reporting timeline is very tight, the information that we discover through the post-evaluation might be coming post hoc, and we will use the pre-equating scoring table. So those things we need to consider whether we want to move to the pre-equating model or stay with the post-equating model. So there are two options I want to present today to the TAC members. The option one for the post-equating evaluation is basically the purpose is to conduct a post-equating evaluation to determine whether there's any operational items, the performance is dramatically different from the bank. And first, we conduct a post-equating on an early representative sample, which is could be smaller than the post-equating sample that we are using year after year for KSA. And we review the item parameters based on the stability criteria. If we decide any item's parameters change dramatically, we might just drop that item from the scoring process, regenerate the new pre-equated scoring table in this option. For option two will be a more comprehensive post-equating evaluation. And the purpose of that is potentially apply the post-equating scoring table if we have a longer timeline. So the first step is the same as option one. We conduct a post-equating on an early representative sample. And we generate the post-equated scoring table and compare that with the pre-equated scoring table. Then we use our criteria to decide which scoring table to use for the option two. So for this option, we're not going to exclude any items from the scoring. We basically just decide whether we stick with the pre-equating scoring table or we just use the post-equated results. So as part of the post-equating evaluation process, we need to pull an early sample of the student data. And by pulling the early sample, that sample might need to be adjusted to be consistent with the prior state population. And there might be some sampling design involved in this procedure to make sure that the early sample is representative of the tested population. And we will conduct the item level analysis to check whether there's any items are unstable. And then we also need to conduct the test level analysis, compare the TCC curves between the pre-equated results and post-equated results. And we also need to evaluate the impact data for the pre-equated and post-equated scoring tables. There, as always, the difference will be expected between the pre-equated and post-equated scoring tables. So the criteria has to be predetermined. See how much we can tolerate the difference, how much difference we can tolerate. And in literature, some researchers describe a difference that matters. So basically the scale score difference greater than half a scale score is considered as a critical difference. And we want to evaluate the performance level cost shift in the raw score points. And maybe there's some other evaluation we can consider. For example, we can consider the difference in the percent of students at level 3 and 4 combined, see how much difference there we can tolerance between the pre-equated and post-equated scoring tables, and then decide whether we go to the pre-equated model or stay with the post-equated models. And whether we move to the pre-equated model or still continue using the post-equated model, our recommendation is to use the post-equating results to refresh the item parameters and update that into the item bank for the future use. So that's basically our thoughts and ideas about whether we move to the pre-equity model, some considerations for the post-equity evaluation. I will pause here to see whether there's any questions, suggestions, recommendation from the TAC members. Pete, I see your hands up as the first.
I think Corinne was first, but so she'd like to go.
It's okay. I don't mind waiting.
Okay, thanks. So I want to start with a general question that, and maybe this is a question for the department. What's the purpose of thinking about going to a pre-equated design?
I can start this one off, Pete, and then I'll look for others. I think Bill Oddie is on with us today, and he has been involved in a lot of those conversations along the way with us. One of the biggest things we're looking at is reporting purposes and being able to provide adequate feedback to our schools and districts in order to help to initiate instruction design for the upcoming school year. That's been a big proponent for us over the years, is to be able to try to get results back as quick as possible. And I know that Pearson has worked with us, in order to try to do that and as best we can with the current system that we're utilizing, as Lacune has showed here with the post-equating discussions. But I think with pre-equating, we might even be able to do a little better. And that's kind of our goal. That's kind of our intent, is be able to provide to get those results back in a manner so that teachers can utilize the data and the information to just prepare for upcoming instruction, and to be better suited for the next school year. So I'll look to anyone else, Bill, or anyone else who'd like to add to that.
Okay, yeah, I think you got it, Kevin. This is Bill Oddie, consulting psychometrician for KTE. Rapid feedback to try and get information out to people as soon as possible. The state legislation requires testing late in the year, and the desire is to have reporting as early as possible. So those are at some level impossible, but we want to get as close as possible to get feedback to the people who provided the instruction.
Yeah, I mean that totally makes sense. It does seem, though, at least off the cuff, that that option 2 would be counterproductive to those goals. So I'm not sure how pursuing option 2 would benefit you in terms of being more timely with your results.
Sorry, Peter. I just
No,
want to jump in here. The option 2 is a more comprehensive post-equating evaluation, which seems very similar to what we are doing for the post-equating right now for KSA. However, the difference is that one uses an early sample. So we right now we use a full sample for the post-equating. So the purpose of using the early sample it allow us to still do the post-equating and do a quick check whether there's any significant difference between the pre-equated and post-equated results to decide whether we want to still use the pre-generated pre-equated scoring table or just switch to the post-equating scoring table based on that early sample analysis.
No, I understand that, and that still involves a sampling design, the decisions made about when whether or not your post-equating sample is sufficiently representative of the population, and then decisions need to be made whether to go with one or the other. And so in theory, that sounds like that all can happen in a quicker timeline, but it does put extra stress on the system because now you're dealing with multiple things at the same time. And I'm not sure whether the time savings then materialize in a substantively meaningful way that you're trying to accomplish by going to pre-equating in the first place. So that was my only concern.
Can I follow up just quickly? This is Bill Audie again. Want to be sure we're on the same page. What you're describing is our evaluation of pre versus post, and are we ready to move to pre-equating? This might not be the design that we would use going forward in future years. In other words, our intention is to get to pre-equating as the method, which would then be more rapid than this study year. Am I stating that correctly, Lukun?
Yes. So basically the timing. Sorry, I hear. So basically the purpose of post-evaluation we need to consider is a time, like when we conduct this post-equating evaluation. If we decide to move to the pre-equating model because we think the item pool are stable enough, we probably just use a post-equating evaluation as a post hoc information because we already decided to go with the pre-equating model. The way that we present here is the pre-equating study. When we move to the pre-equating model, some steps time will be adjusted. So some post-equating evaluation might not happen before the scoring tables, before the score reporting happen. That might happen afterwards. Corinne, I see your hands up next.
Yeah, that helps because I specifically was going to ask for one question of, is this just kind of a one-time thing to help you make a good decision, or is this your operational and I think I favor option 2 when thinking of it as a one-time, maybe two-time thing to check, I favor it because of step 3. It's nice for you to look at a direct comparison of what happens in the pre versus the post.
Yes.
But again, I agree with Pete that ongoing, that sounds hard and messy, but doesn't sound like your plan. Why were you only going to look at levels 3 and 4 was a question that I had. But also you were saying you would look at changes of percentages between 3 and 4. I'm wondering if, yeah, there you go. Evaluate differences in those group. Maybe that's because, well, you can speak to why. I was almost thinking though that it would help to look at more of a decision matrix to think about the number of students who would have false positives, false negatives compared to the post. I think that, you know, considering that individual kind of experience, equating should always be a matter of indifference to the user. But I think that kind of analysis at the categorical, maybe even just at a pass fail, if Kentucky, I can't remember where your highest stakes are drawn, but I would think that might be a little more informative than just looking at percentages. Yeah.
Yes, I think that's a great idea. This slide just show a partial list of criteria that we can look into, but we are open to any recommendations and how to further modify this list to be more meaningful for the students.
Yeah, difference that matters is interesting too. You have to think about the rounding. I mean, you have rounding stuff in here, but it doesn't always capture. I actually am trying to think if I'm wrong, but I think a decision table, false negative, false positive, true, and all the trues would get at a little bit more of a difference that matters than simply the 0.5. But doing both would be robust, which is nice.
Yes, I agree. Suzanne is the next, I think.
Thank you. This is Suzanne Lane. This has been very helpful. I would be really careful in thinking about what you define a representative sample, and I'd like to see some criteria. And I know that some states don't just wait to the final, but they're doing it on multiple samples as the data comes in, just to see if something jumps out initially. So you might want to consider that too, but I would be having some criteria for what's representative enough. The other, I like option 2 as well, and I liked Corinne's idea of what to include as a criteria. I am not sure if you want to look at percentages of students as in proficient and distinguished for pre and post equating, because I think it might provide why would you choose one over the other? I hope it would not be because this changes in percent of students. I hope there's other criteria that's used, as you've already mentioned. So I would just try to stay away from that.
Thanks. Phoebe, you're next.
Yes, I'd like to echo what Suzanne said and what Corinne said about what to look at. I go with option 1 because I think it's always a bad idea to look at overall score changes when making a decision. Even if there is no, Pearson doesn't have a dog in the fight, right? They don't care. They don't accept, you want quality, but in terms of proportion, proficient, proportion, not proficient, but Kentucky does, and the appearance of bias, even if it's not there. So I love Corinne's suggestion to look only present. I don't care what Pearson looks at, but Kentucky to make their decision, should only look at the false positives and false negatives. And the reason so it'd be a combo of option 1 and option 2. I like option 1 because it focuses in on the item stability, which is the total, all our basis for pre-equating and post-equating is, now that we're an IRT country, is based on the stability of items, basically. It's based on item stats. So I like, if your items are fine, then the post-equating and pre-equating would be the same. So I would my preference would be to focus on the items, and then in option 2, only make a decision based on proportion of false positives and negatives. And I don't know if you can do a curve to go along with that, but anyway, it doesn't matter. you know, to review it, and also come up. You can either say whichever one's better, or go with a preference for keeping the original item parameters, and put a criterion in there that you know, anything, if we see if one has 2 percentage points fewer false positives or false negatives, then we'll go with that.
Yeah. Brian, I think that you have questions. Sorry, you're on mute.
Thanks. When you're comparing the two, how will you decide which one is more accurate?
So
there'll be a difference. So
Yes.
there's a difference. Which one are you inclined to keep or to follow?
So that's why I want to present some of the criteria we are already think about, like the difference that matters, or evaluate the performance level cost shift in raw score points. And once we have a list of criteria KTE agrees to take on, then we decide whether we stay with the post-equating procedure or move to the pre-equating model. And the study we show here is just, you know, like a 1-time or 2-time thing, that we want to make sure that items are, the item bank are stable enough for us to move to the pre-equating model. So we are not going to conduct the post-equating evaluation every year after we move to the pre-equating model, unless we see a lot of item instability happened.
It seems to me that an underlying value that's maybe needs to be surfaced is that we're prioritizing consistency with past, and that was one of the questions about eliminating items from the anchor set. It was saying if the items are changed, then we're going to throw them out. And I think the KTAC members were saying, really look at the content, because if there's not a reason for the content, if we eliminate them, what we're doing is we're suppressing actual change in the student performance. And so it seems that by having criteria that say we don't want to have much change, we're not sure if that's accurate or not. We're just saying that we favor not changing very much.
Part of the reason that we consider to move to the pre-equating model is we consider the item pool are stable enough, and we think the item parameters should be invariant year over year. And the option 1 provide the item drift analysis is to see whether there's parameter significant change from the banked parameters. And I like the idea that we need to add a piece of content evaluation into account, not just purely driven by the item statistics, so that we make sure that the set of items that used for the scoring tables cover the sufficient content coverage. The data-driven method could be biased, because sometimes the statistics saying one thing, but when we look into the content, the item probably just be fine. And we don't have a reason to throw that out only by looking one piece of information there. Anita, I think you would like to go next.
Yeah, thank you. So I really just want to uplift the point that Brian raised. It's just so important, again, to look at those other pieces, including content. I think another thing just to consider is in what ways are things such as context effects, things such as that being discussed as part of the conversation? It just feels very, again, just driven by, looking at the statistics, but I think it warrants a broader conversation of what may be happening, including, things such as student motivation or item position on the test. Like all of these things are really important just to take into account. And it's, if there's a way in which you can kind of build some of these discussions and conversations around how you're looking at these statistics so that it feels like you are kind of working around this larger, broader triangulation framework, I think it would just feel better, so that it doesn't feel like everything is being driven just by the statistical analysis, because I can imagine that you will likely have drift, especially with, for example, some of your open-ended responses. So that's, just something to think about.
Yes, yeah, I like your idea. I think those are very important information. For sure that, when we consider to move to pre-equating model, the basis is we think the item are stable enough, and we want to make sure that we do the testing design, the items, the tests are comparable year after year, so that we're not just driven by data analysis to see, oh, this item violate some of the criteria, we just throw that out. We have to think about from the content point of view and from the test design, the comprehensive, the better. Corinne, I think you have your hands up.
Yeah, I wanted to ask, and you might move in slides or whatever, about your fifth question that you had for us. I was really confused on what you're asking us or what you're considering there within versus across grade levels.
So basically, when we do the post-equating evaluation, probably for some grade level, it suggests we move to the pre-equating model. But for some other grades, it might have the different stay with the post-equating. So there's a conflict of the decision-making across a grade level within the same subject. So I would like to hear about TAC member suggestion, how we handle that, or in any recommendation.
That makes sense. It's not statistically a question. It's whether you decide how you equate might vary. So my off the cuff is consistency would be good. Again, thinking about the fact that no matter what you do, there are going to be some students who are impacted by the decision. It seems like a consistent decision could be good. But I think this also brings up what was kind of alluded to in a lot of our comment, and this isn't bad, but I think a lot of this is coming under the assumption that the post-equating is ideal and accurate, right? And so therefore, you only use pre-equating if it matches it and it becomes kind of this standard. I don't think that's bad or good. But I think that's why you might end up considering what I consider odd things, making one decision for one grade level and doing a different kind of equating for another. But there are people on the panel who have a lot more experience on these TACs across states. So maybe that's not an odd choice, but my first thought is to be consistent. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Pete, do you want to go next?
Sure, thank you. I just want to go back to maybe because it's early on the West Coast, but I want to go back to this notion of making decisions between using pre or post equating, and that the like option 2 or any of these options are a short-term check to see whether pre-equating could work, and I think I guess I'm not clear on whether, for example, next year you're going to use pre-equating, use post-equating check, and then make a decision on which scoring tables you would use for actual reporting and results. And I think my concern is that while you have criteria, you don't really have criteria that span the process of the system. In other words, next year you do your sampling and your post-equating and it all looks good and you go, yay, pre-equating is great. And then the following year, you're going to do a second check and it turns out, oh no, pre-equating was terrible. We got to go use the post-equating. And so now you're kind of at 1 and 1 and you've really made no systematic progress, because now what you're going to say after 2 years is, well, we need to do this some more. And so now you're going back and forth. And so I think perhaps and maybe this is the framing and I just missed it, but I think perhaps the framing is you're going to stick with post-equating. That's going to be your method until such time you get sufficiently stable results from your pre-equating that you'll then switch to the pre-equating, versus we're going to do pre-equating and then we're going to have a set of ad hoc rules every year to decide if we're going to stick with it. So I think that's not a good way to establish the system. So, and maybe that's the plan. And I'm misreading it, but I think you should decide what the course of action will be and only switch when you're ready to switch, and not switch and then potentially switch back.
Yes.
And that might be for as much for the department as it is for you.
Right. Phoebe, you want to go next?
Yeah, I agree with Pete. And I think that this should be a one-time thing to determine whether pre-equating is okay to do, and if it is, then to go with it. And that in following years, what you might do is, in other states, we talk about a post-administration check, and then you do the evaluation of the item parameters, and if there's a change in some item parameters, you might update the pool with that, but it has nothing to do with the scoring you've already done. So, Corinne, that's what most states we suggest. I've been on. Of course, some of these people, we're on the same team, is to pick one and do it. And it's not going to make if it's a difference, you don't know which difference is correct. I mean, that's a problem with, except the false positive, false negative thing, which actually is a criterion in and of itself. But you never know which is right. And there will be a difference because nothing is perfect. So I guess I'm going with Pete. This year, see if do the question like, our model is, we want to see if pre-equating is stable enough to use. And if it is, we're going to use it this year. If it's not, we're going to post-equate and then see what we can do to move towards pre-equating in the future, because that's where you want to go. And just pose the question that way. And then in the future, we will always, as part of as technical maintenance, which people do, is go back and evaluate our item parameters and update the pool as whatever plan you have for updating the pool. But it wouldn't, in the future, this kind of check would not be, or this kind of analysis wouldn't have anything to do with pre and post equating. It would have to do with updating item parameters, if that makes any sense.
Yes. So yeah, I like all these good suggestions. When we develop this the pre-equating study plan, we will take those into consideration. Suzanne, I think your hand's up at some point. Sorry, you're on mute.
Sorry, this is Suzanne Lane. I was going to say something similar to what Phoebe said in terms of moving forward, but I do know that there are some states that check pre-equating for a few years. It's not just some of the TACs that I've served on that do it for a few years. It's not just 1 year. But I think if the first year is very successful, I think it's hard to determine when not to go with it, because we really don't know the truth. So I would try to move forward as quick as possible if the first year is successful.
Yes. Thank you.
Bill, I had a question for, I'm not sure who would answer it. Maybe it was Bill or maybe Kevin. If pre-equating were used, how much time would it make a difference in terms of getting reports to schools and districts?
Actually, LeCun may know it more in terms of our current contract time. It was a matter of approaching a month, I think.
Oh, quite a bit.
LeCun, am I accurate about? I don't know whether I'm conflating other issues like open response scoring and all that, but does take us a while to go through the equating process as it is.
Yeah, so the current post-equating process takes about 2 weeks to finish, not to consider the open-ended question scoring part. But it's going to be much quicker than the post-equating model. From the perspective of faster reporting, definitely pre-equating model is much more favorable. Phoebe, I think you have your hands up.
Yeah, does it also give you additional time for quality control procedures with pre-equating that you can make sure things are set up correctly as opposed to post-equating when you're doing quality control while you're equating? Or is that fantasy?
So if we go to the pre-equating model, the scoring table will be checked before the administration time. So some of the quality control procedures will happen before the test administration starts. So those will be time saving. Yeah. I think I don't have other questions. Yeah, can vote. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you very much, LeCun, for your really well-organized presentation, and we hope that our KTAC responses to your questions were helpful. We'll also get the notes. I'm sure you've taken notes as well to you. We're a little bit ahead of schedule. I wonder if it'd be all right if we took like a 12-minute break before we go on to the scoring. Kevin, would that be okay?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah. I think give people a chance to get up and stretch their legs or get some more coffee or water, anything like that.
Okay, great. Why don't we come back then at 25 after 12? I'm Brian Gong. Welcome back to the meeting of the Kentucky Technical Advisory Committee. We're ready to go into our next topic, which is constructed response scoring, and we're pleased to have members from Pearson's team. Andrew, if you'll go ahead and ask members of your team to introduce themselves, we'll turn the time over to you.
Great, thanks. Yeah, I'm Andrew Thompson. I'm a portfolio manager with Pearson on the human hand scoring side. I've been with human scoring since 1994. I used to have hair when I started. And Ed, if you'll introduce yourself.
Yeah, I'm Ed Wolf. I'm Director of Automated Scoring at Pearson. I've been in this position about 9 months, but have been doing work with human raters for a couple of decades at this point. And Karine, your background looks very familiar to me. I started as a faculty member at Florida.
So Brian, do you want me to go ahead and take control?
Please, Andrew, go ahead and take control.
So the questions we had was, what advice does the TAC have regarding scoring of constructor responses, both human and the automated scoring? And is there anything for the future of scoring, the way we're doing it now? It's been an iterative process. We started with complete human scoring. We have transitioned to using a combination of AI scoring and human scoring to support the program. So we do have a number of subject and grades. We'll kind of go into this. So for the on-demand writing, we use the automated scoring as 100% first score, and then we do 100% human second score. And that is historical. When we first were doing it, we had a human first score, human second score. The on-demand writing was the one subject area where we had 100% second score, because I think the scores were added together to create the sum for the student. So we held on to that model. With social studies and reading, AI is the first score, and we do a 20% quality check back score on that. For math, science, and editing mechanics, so far we have not incorporated AI. So those are 100% first score human, and we still do a 20% quality control check on those responses. What I'll be doing is talking really about how we ensure and control the quality of our human raters, and then Ed will talk about the automated side. So the quality controls that we have in place, it starts, and I say training and qualification. Training are responses that we get anchor papers and training practice papers and qualification papers, and those come from a range finding that we conduct with educators in Kentucky. And we use a virtual range finding, just like we're doing a virtual TAC meeting. We do a virtual range finding meeting. We find it's very successful. The Kentucky educators are extremely engaged. We have typically been doing an evening session, which allows teachers to not leave their school, so they're still supporting their students. And then we get to entertain them at night, and it's worked really well. And we also see that we get a really good breadth and width of the state, because all the teachers can participate rather than having to come into a local site. So we really enjoy having those range findings. Those range findings really inform our what we call our anchor papers. Those are those clear examples of score points as represented by the rubric. And we use the conversations we have with those educators to write our annotations, which are the explanations of why the response gets the score it did based on the rubric. We take our scores through a series of practice sets where they're able to practice. Those are typically, a whole range of different kinds of scores. Some are higher, some are lower within the score point range. And then we end up with qualification. We have 2 sets of 10 responses for all of our subject areas, and they must they must demonstrate their quality in order to continue on with the process. If they do not qualify, then they're excluded and we don't use them in scoring. Once we begin scoring, we have another series of processes we use. We call it validity. Those are responses which are good, clear examples still of score points as chosen by our content specialists and scoring directors. And those are inserted in such a way that the scores are not aware that they're looking at a validity response. So they're looking at a response, they score it. It may be a student response that is just going to be a regular response. It could be a validity response in which we're monitoring them, and I'll show you the data, or you've already seen it in the slides. But we maintain that data at the aggregate across all of our scores, and each score, him or herself, is also being monitored on that validity. Validity's review is something that we have incorporated probably within the last decade, where we have an annotation written on that response. The scorer can't see it while they're scoring it, but if they miss the response, they immediately get that response back, as well as that annotation that explains why that response should have been given a score point of 2, for example, and why, I gave it a 3, and I get the reason why it should have been a 2. Once that response is seen by that scorer with the score, he or she will no longer be able to see that response. So it maintains that anonymity of the validity response. Our supervisors, kind of backtrack again. We have scores, then they work with a supervisor who works directly with them. And then there's a scoring director above the supervisor who maintains kind of an overall control. And then we have a content specialist, which is responsible for an entire subject area, such as on-demand writing, science, reading, math, etc. So the scores and the supervisors work very closely together. So what we start doing initially is we have our supervisors just backread as much as they can all the scores. And then once we start identifying based on statistics, this score seems to be struggling on the 2-3 line. Well, that supervisor is going to backread more on that line for that score and be able to message them, give them some feedback, coaching. We have calibration, which we can send out, which is kind of a retraining to make sure that the scores are applying the rubric the way that is intended and we need them to. We also use what we call score exception, which is if a scorer is not scoring accurately enough, and usually we do this through the validity. If their validity is such that we do not trust their scores, then we remove them and dismiss them from the program, and then those responses are reset and it gets re-entered into the pool so that a scorer who is applying the rubric correctly is able to then get that score. Suzanne. I think you're on mute.
Still haven't learned. This is Suzanne Lane. If you don't want questions throughout it, it's fine. Just let me know and I can hold them. Okay.
Please, yeah.
I have two questions. One is, do you, and I'm sure you do, because I've heard Pearson discuss it in other TACs, look at drift. So putting in responses from a previous year that have been scored to ensure that there's no drift in scoring over years?
On Kentucky, we don't, because most of the responses, some responses are reused, but most are new, so we don't have them from a previous year.
So even if there are some items are used across years.
There have been a few, yeah, but
I'm wondering even for those you might want to do it just to examine.
Right,
drift.
no, that's good.
And my other question is, and I know that there's different views on this for your validity papers. You provide responses that are clear examples at the score level. Do you ever provide examples that might not be as clear, that might be a little unique, just to, just as a further check to go a little deeper?
Yeah, I mean, when I say a clear example, that doesn't mean that they are right in the middle of the two. It's that there is a clear explanation why this should have gotten a 2. It may be a 2+ or a 2-, but in the totality, it is a clear 2 and easy to explain. We also try to not put in very unique items, responses, because they would be very memorable. We do try to rotate the validity such that a scorer doesn't see a typical validity paper over and over and over, but on the off chance that it does, we wouldn't want it to be very recognizable for that purpose. Corinne? Phoebe?
Yeah, just this more clarifying question. Do you train item by item, or do you have generic rubrics? Or do you have generic rubrics and train item by item?
That's a great question. We do have some holistic rubrics, but we train item specific. Any other questions? All right. Now, I'm not going to go through every stat with you because, again, you can see this, and there's a ton. What we did want to show, though, is the evidence of the quality that we are maintaining. On the writing, the social studies, and the reading, the IRR is based on human versus the engine, or on papers that we call outlier papers, or the papers that the AI engine has a lower confidence than the threshold. Those are then sent back to humans, and we do a human first and then the human second on those. So when we're looking at the IRR, that's what that is. The validity are the human validity scores on the papers that were given. On the on-demand writing, it's a 0 through 4. And then we have either 5 traits for grade 5 or 6 traits for 8 and 11. The difference is that grades 5 does not have the counterclaim that 8 and 11 do. So that's the extra trait there. We did meet all of our IRR and validity requirements on all of the on-demand writing. The one thing I wanted to point out and maybe get some advice from the committee is we do notice that students and therefore sometimes our scorers struggle on the support trait, whether the student is using the support, all the stimuli that they're given, if they're using that support well, and then the counterclaim on grades 8 and 11. Those are the 2 traits where we see. And they do vary, but in general, we do see that those are the traits that our IRR is a little bit lower, and we also see that students struggle. And again, it makes it a little harder for us to recognize if the students are struggling. But other than that, I just wanted to demonstrate, yeah, the IRR and our validity were at or above the quality targets that we have had for, since we've had this contract with Kentucky. There's grade 8 and 11. Phoebe.
This is Phoebe Winter. And it would be interesting to, if you want to do a deep dive, not obviously at this meeting, into the support and counterclaims, to have the rubrics available and some scoring stats and sample papers, because it's hard to give advice on. I mean, there's generic, train more, right. put in a better variety of papers, that kind of stuff. But there might be some things that people who have done scoring across states can look at and look at the sample papers and point out some issues, because usually most states have trouble with, there isn't a conventions one here. So I know that conventions is one that always gets everybody. But this is a different model than many other states use. So.
Right. Yeah. And I appreciate that. And you're right. Conventions, a lot of times we do see that some people want to bring out the red pencil and mark, the conventions, and others don't. But those are good points. Brian?
And Andrew, do you know what the score distributions are for most of these traits? So if there's 6 possible points, are they actually used? I'm just wondering, the 60% seems like a low threshold. You're beating it most of the time, but if there really are 6 score points that are being widely used, that's one thing. But if there are only 3 or 4, then it's very different.
And we do see, and I don't have the frequency distribution in front of me right now, but we do see 5s and 6s. The 1s through 4s, those are easier. But yeah, we do see a full range. It's not a 6th, of each category, but we do have a full range of scores on on-demand writing. Suzanne, I think you're next.
Thank you. This is Suzanne Lane. Do you look at contingency tables so that you can see where the disagreement is, or if it's in the lower end of the score ring rubric or at the upper end?
Yeah,
Like 6 by 6 tables, if this total score points is 6?
Yeah, we have within our scoring system, we have where we can see where the disagreements are at the trait level and at the score point level.
Yeah, because sometimes that is useful to go back and thinking about how to perhaps even fine tune, not that you want to be messing with rubrics for trend purposes, but or fine tune training, but to see where on the scale it is. The other thing, I'm assuming that a particular score is scoring a response on all of these traits.
That's correct.
For a student. So do you also look at the correlation among these trait scores just to see if there's any differences?
Yeah, I mean, and we're always concerned with, we call it the halo effect, that you're gonna, a score will give, clarity and coherence a 2, therefore he or she will give all 2s. And so we do see, we see that does happen. I know Bill Oddie, we've had a lot of conversations about, do we really have 6 traits, or, and that's something that we do follow. And when we're doing our practice and qualification papers, we make sure to have responses that don't have all 1 score, so that we are making sure that the scores are looking at the rubric of each trait and applying it.
That's great.
Yeah, Corinne, I think you were next.
Yeah, I wanted to follow up on Brian's a little. How did you all decide 60% as the benchmark? Is there like some reasoning behind it?
It was a historical quality control chart that we had within Pearson, and we shared with Kentucky when we were moving towards, because we had a 4-point scale and we were moving to holistic, and we moved a few years back to the 5 and 6 trait, and that was just our target that we had internally.
Yeah, I think for the AI one, it's worth considering, what would the general public and your stakeholders feel is strong enough between AI and humans. Probably that would be a different perception than reliability and historical, and probably there's a lot less to justify it, which means it's not easy, but it seems low for if someone, was thinking, are you going to use AI on me or not? Just kind of the way the public discourse is right now. Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah, Phoebe?
Yes, I wanted to reply to the, whether there are actually 5 or 6 traits. And I think just from experience and having done this a lot over time, is basically typically what there aren't 5 distinguishable traits, but the reason we use them is they can be taught that way. It's a good teaching tool, and typically, at least with a 5-trait model that I did some research into, with different states, I think. But anyway, that typically you might have a surface structure and a deep structure. Surface structure being like language and things like that, and deep structure being organization. And I don't know what your definitions are for your thing, so it may not fit. But I think it's important to determine, because I know a lot of times, do we have 5 or 6 traits, do we have to score on all of these, is to determine the intent of having that scoring system, and whether teachers find it useful in terms of using the results. So thanks. That wasn't a question, that was a sermon, I'm sorry.
All right. Well, then I'm going to move to editing mechanics, and this is something that is currently not scored through AI. This is human only. But before I go, Corinne, did you have another question? Okay. Editing mechanics. Now, editing mechanics is a little bit different in terms of it could be, they're usually short responses, a sentence or 2 maybe, where we are asking the student either to maybe correct an error that was in the passage that he or she is reading, or it could be something about combining two sentences into one complete sentence to avoid repetition, things like that. So that's what the editing mechanics section is, and it's a 0, 1, 2. So we do have they missed it completely, they got part of it right, and they got it correct. So those are the score patterns that we use on that rubric. And again, it would be based on it's a generic rubric in terms of partial credit or complete credit, but it's based on the specific item when we train it. Social studies, we have an extended social studies response, and then we have a short response, and it's just an easier to explain. On the short constructed response is typically something where we want them to write at least 2 sentences to provide the answer to whatever the question was, and then whatever text evidence there is. On the extended response, it's usually a more complex question to begin with, and we're asking them to write a couple of paragraphs to explain their answer and then to provide the support that they have. Most of the Kentucky social studies have a lot of stimuli for each of the questions, so the student has a lot of charts, data, historical records that they can incorporate to respond into the social studies. Yeah, Brian.
Andrew, it seems that for most of the content areas, the agreement on the validity papers is higher than the inter-rater reliability. How do you explain that?
I think it goes back to the idea that the validity responses are clear examples, and especially when you have something like in social studies or in the editing mechanics, where especially if it is a right answer and that text evidence is solid, it's easy to see those. So I think the validity will typically be higher than your IRR, because IRR are just random papers that could be extremely close to the line, where one scorer could see it as a 2 minus and another scorer could see it as a 1 plus, but we don't have those in place, so it's a 1 and a 2. So we do see the disagreement on the exact.
I might add
go ahead.
I was going to say, I might add to that the validity scores are assigned as a consensus by a panel of experts in most cases, and so that target is more accurate or more reliable than the target that we're comparing two randomly selected raters against.
Yeah, but I think, as I understand, the validity papers are to check for the accuracy and scoring. And so what you want to have is a full range of the possible scores, not just. And I thought, Andrew, at first you said we didn't have just solid 1s or 2s. You have a 2 plus and a 2 minus, but you should have validity borderline papers so you know whether scores are scoring borderline papers accurately. It's not clear to me that you actually have that.
No, yeah, I appreciate that, and I'll get to everybody. Yeah, I think we also want to make sure that we're being fair to our scores, because again, we don't want to have a validity paper that that one might think is tricky. Again, that's why I'm saying, it might not be right down the middle of the score point, but they're easy to explain why that paper did earn the score it did. And we have validity at all the score points. It's not just at the higher score points. So we will, like I say, if somebody is not getting the validity correct, we will dismiss them, and that's their job. And so we don't want to necessarily jeopardize that with something that could be considered tricky. So we do still want to make sure that whatever that validity response is, we can explain using the Kentucky rubric to explain it. Suzanne, I think you're next.
Andrew, you might have said this in a previous conversation about the 60% target for the writing, but why is there a 65% target for all of the other subjects and not a 60% or vice versa when there is the same number of score points? I just like the rationale for it.
Because on the writing, which is that 5 or 6 trait, it's 6 traits, but you're applying 1 to 4 score points at each trait. And since a score is having to apply all the traits at one time, it was considered to be more difficult task, and therefore the IRR target was lower than on like the social studies where it's a 0, 1, 2, 3, 4. It's just a holistic score. You're not having to separate the idea plus the use of evidence.
Thank you.
Yep. Phoebe?
I like Ed's comment about the reliability of scores on the validity sets, because by definition, since they're agreed upon by a group of expert raters, they're probably solid, whether they're solid lows, whether they're solid 4 or 2 minuses or solid down the middle 2s, they're pretty solid papers. So yeah, because 2 minus isn't hard. It just means you're at the lower end of the scale. Now there's true borderline papers would never make it because the panel wouldn't agree to it. So I think it would be kind of interesting to, maybe it's mathematically possible, I don't know, to look at the degree to which the quality of the validity papers is kind of boosting score performance. Try it because if you have a 1 plus 2 minus, you really don't expect agreement. That's a lot of states go through and just use both and give them a 1.5 in that case. I know there aren't supposed to be, but there are papers that are neither one nor the other. So I'm I think it would be interesting to find out, like, if the regular papers had the same stability of scores as this is chicken and egg stuff, so it's going to be hard, but I'm sure someone with the smarts at Pearson could look at that to kind of show what it would be if they were very stable papers, similar to the validity papers, or vice versa, what the validity papers would look like if they had the uncertainty that the regular papers have. But I mean, it's probably not necessary, but I think it would be interesting. Thank you.
Oh, thank you. Thanks for that comment. And then we'll just go quickly through. The rest are very similar ideas in terms of, and again, science, that's all human, and 20% quality control. And again, these are, we call them extended constructed response. So it's, it could be where the student is having to answer kind of multiple sections where they're giving, again, a bunch of stimuli, and it's, interpreting, what would be a best response to this, what would be the worst type of response. So they're having to write multiple paragraphs to explain. So it earns more score points for the student. Then math, we have a lot of different types of math responses. You have some that are like the 0-1 are typically where it's in pair with a machine scored item. So the student, gets the correct answer on the machine scored, and then we ask for an explanation, and that's being scored by the human. Did they explain why they got the right answer correctly? So that's kind of the 0-1. And then you have the short responses, which are a little bit easier. And then on the extended 0 to 4, again, those are more complex math questions for those students. So they're having to do multiple calculations and then give a complete explanation of why they did that. So those are the ones that earn the higher score points. And again, right now, this is the human scored with the human second. Quality control. Reading, similar. This is again AI scored with human quality check, and we have the easier short constructed response where it's just identify, answer, text, and then the extended where they're having to use multiple stimuli and richer explanation of their answer to get the higher score points. And with that, anything else before we turn this over to Ed? I really appreciate all the feedback. I'm trying to take notes, but I'm going to depend on others because I was also trying to concentrate. So I do appreciate all the feedback.
Andrew, this is Brian Gong. I do do have another question. Do you know about how many validity papers a individual scorer sees in a session? So, you know, if you're doing something like they're going to be dismissed if they fall below, you know, I don't know what it is, 60%, then you would hope that it's not like 3 out of 5 papers. It's like more than you. So about how many validity papers do you have in your pool, and how many would an individual student scorer see in a regular ongoing session?
Right. Well, what we do is they're introduced randomly, so the scorer doesn't see them. They're introduced at like a 3 to 5% insertion rate, so that while they're scoring, you know, they may see 2 in a row, and then they may not see another for 6, 7 responses. And what we do is we have what we call an interval. So we give that scorer, 5 responses for the first check, and that's when they get a message saying, your validity agreement rate is low. We give them another 5 to see if they've improved. If they don't improve, we have what we call a targeted calibration, which is almost like requalification. If they aren't able to pass the targeted calibration, they're dismissed. But if they are able to pass, then they go back into the pool, they're scoring, unless they then demonstrate that they're still not applying it correctly, and then that's when they're dismissed and we reset. Pete?
Thank you. I'm curious whether you keep track of it, especially in comparing AI to human scoring, whether you keep track of the effect of time or the number of papers scored by the human. Presumably AI is, number of papers scored is independent of anything, but I know you monitor performance of human scores over time to make sure that they're staying on a rubric, but I'd be curious to what extent there's sort of a divergence of scores over time between, if AI is the anchor and humans after, if the reliability is very high for the first 20 papers and then starts to drift down, that might be informative to you in terms of rechecking the humans. I think of some things of that nature being kind of useful. I don't know if you do that already or not.
Right. Well, it's very much a collaborative effort when we're scoring on Kentucky, where we meet with the AI team every day, and they review what our scores are doing, and they may actually give us advice about, you really might want to backread more on the 2-3 line because we're seeing some disagreements there, or we want to enhance their models, and so it's very much of a collaborative effort between the AI group and the human group.
All right, with that pause, I'm going to jump in then. So yeah, I'm Ed Wolf. I am Director of Scoring, Automated Scoring, and so I'm going to talk first about the scoring process itself. So this slide shows a high-level view of how we go about training the Intelligent Essay Assessor, which is the automated scoring product that we apply in Kentucky. So we begin with existing data. It's often from field tests, and that constitutes the training population. And then those responses are assigned scores by human raters, and we conduct some preliminary checks to evaluate the quality of the human scores and the trustworthiness of the data, especially if it comes from a standalone field test. From those scores, we split, typically using simple random sampling, we split that population into a training set and a test set. It's referred to as a holdout set data set here. On occasion, we might stratify on score points when the score distribution is sparse at some of the score points. Ideally, we have at least 4,000 cases in the training set and 2,000 in the holdout set. That's not the case in all cases, but we strive for that and often hit that. Then we train the engine using that training data set, typically using either a feature-based model. You'll think of that as multiple regression, or a transformer model like BERT, or some combination of those. In all cases, we use a combination of multiple algorithms in each attempt, as well as using multiple iterations that involve using different configurations for that algorithm. That training is often executed at is almost always executed at the level of grade by prompt by trait combination. We also employ an ensemble method to collate predictions across algorithms, and we employ an optimization process to identify the between score category cut points, because our predictions are on a continuous scale rather than the categorical scale. And then each of the ensembled options is evaluated using multiple criteria to determine the best option from those results. So now we have a trained model. We've evaluated its fit, made sure that it is doing an adequate job compared to the performance standards that have been set in place ahead of time, and we're ready to deploy that model on new responses. In terms of quality assurance, we have two levels of this. One is model acceptance, and the other is operational monitoring. When model acceptance is that box that was on the previous slide, we have identified several models. We're comparing one to another. We look at several indices. And in all cases, this is performance against what we typically call the best available human score. We look at the exact percentage of agreement, and as Andrew indicated, that varies based on the number of score points in the content area. We also look at the percentage of adjacent agreement. Needs to be 96 or 95%, depending, or better, I should have said. We also look at quadratically weighted kappa, which in all cases needs to be greater than 0.7. I skipped one. We also look at the exact agreement at each score point. That needs to be 50% or better. We look at the Pearson correlation as well, which also has to be 0.7, and the standardized mean difference. That is the difference between the mean score assigned by humans, the mean score assigned by the IEA engine. Subtract them, divide them by the pooled standard deviation, and that needs to be, that absolute value of that needs to be less than 0.15. These are standard criteria that we consider, and then if we don't meet these criteria, we might consider using something that we call retraining on the fly. Suzanne, yeah.
Hi, Ed. This is Suzanne Lane. I've heard you talk and heard other folks from Pearson discuss it in the past, so I'm sure you do this. But could you talk a little bit about how you ensure representation for the training model? And then also, when you're looking at these indices, are you looking at them across all students as well as key subgroups?
Yeah. So let me get on that second question first, since it's fresh in mind. Yes, we do evaluate subgroup analyses. That's typically by agreement with the customer. And basically we use these exact same indices, however, and these exact same criterion values. However, the standardized mean difference, for some reason, Williamson and colleagues said that for subgroup analysis, that should be within 0.1 standard deviations. And so what we do is we compute these for every demographic subgroup of interest, and we compare the human-to-human performance on these indices to the engine-to-human performance on these indices. And Suzanne, I'm sorry, you're going to have to remind me of what the first question was.
I'll just comment on that, and I think those are extremely important fairness and equity studies to do. So whatever state you're working with, I do hope that they adopt them to look at relevant subgroups and how they perform on them. And my second question was having to do with, and also at times you might have to oversample some of the subgroups. But my second question had to do with the representativeness of the group for training the system.
Yes. Yeah, so we use simple random sampling when we have a larger data set for those two data files that we end up creating. More typically, however, what we do is we take the entire population of field test scores available to us and then just simply randomly divide them, simple random sampling, into the training and the holdout set. In some cases, as you pointed out, for subgroups, we need to stratify intentionally on some score points because we don't have sufficient number of cases in a particular score point to adequately perform at that score point. As is shown here, we had hit 50% exact agreement, and the error band around that statistic might be quite large if we have a very small number in our test case, but we also have to balance that. This is the art of it, figuring out, well, how many cases can we get away with minimum in order to get adequate fit at that score point for the model. Corinne?
Hi, this is Corinne from Corinne Huggins Manley. Sorry if I missed this, but when you say best human score, so two questions: what makes one the best? But also, you're using that when you are comparing on the holdout set, right? But then what about for the actual, or is that true also in the training set?
It's more standard for the training set. We want to use the best available data. And our definition of the best available data, we have a hierarchy that we use to rank to rank this quality of the score. For example, if it is a validity paper that we might be including, that is probably that is a number one priority because we know that those scores are typically consensus by experts. If we have a back reading score and that back reading score was assigned by a scoring supervisor, that might be the second rank. If we have a resolution score, which considers 2 or 3 raters in combination or an override of that score, we would consider that in many cases to be the third rank. And then the bottom rank would be simply a randomly selected rater from the pool. Okay, so that's more questions on that. Oh, jumped the gun, Phoebe.
Sorry. What is retraining on the fly? I mean, what does it consist of?
Yeah, so in that case, what we do, thanks for asking. I didn't know whether I needed to get into that detail or not here. If we find a model that works pretty well, that is, it works adequately at certain score points, but not all of them. We might, for example, have a situation where the human scorers haven't hit their targets at a particular score point, or because of very asymmetrical data, we have minimal number of cases at a particular score point, and so we're not able to get a fully deployable model, but a partially deployable model. We will begin operational scoring in that case using our continuous flow system, which communicates between our automated scoring system and our human scoring system. What happens in that case is the operational scores come in, they're sent to humans and the automated engine at the same time. The automated engine creates a predicted score, and if that score is in one of the categories that we are confident about, then that is recorded as a temporary score of record. If it is in another category, we send it to the human scorers and say, score this. We're going to use that data subsequently to retrain the model, and we'll go through that iterative process until we arrive at a fully deployable model. And at that time, we deploy that model and rescore everything using that revised model.
And do you check the new model on the same validity set that you did? Okay, thanks.
Well,
or on a validity set that's
not necessarily. That validity set might be supplemented with operational scores because we might be, we might not have originally had enough cases. We certainly are supplementing the training set. But at times we will also supplement the validity set if, for example, we had so few that we weren't even confident in the statistic to begin with.
So would the operational scores then come from something totally independent of what was used for training, or might some of them also have been included in the retraining?
Yeah, to be clear, let's just talk about the original training and the retraining. Original training is only field test. Retraining is often a combination of field test and operational because we want to get to the point as quickly as we can to take advantage of the automated scoring. And so that retrain data file would contain field test data and the operational data as it comes in, as it comes into our system, I should say. Is that? I'm going to be clear. Did that answer your question, Phoebe?
I guess let me give the intent of my question, and that is, and then that might be easier.
Sure.
Is that the validity set or the evaluation set doesn't include any of the same papers as the training set in the retraining.
Absolutely.
But in the retraining set.
Yeah, we would call that contamination. We never use a case that was trained in our holdout set.
Even when you're doing this retraining on the fly.
That's right.
Okay,
that's right.
Great. Yeah, that was fine. Thank you.
In fact, yeah, to be very clear, often in those cases, our target in retraining on the fly, and maybe this is what you're getting at to begin with, is the validity set that we created, the holdout set that we created during the original training.
Sorry.
I guess I was trying to be clear and say sometimes we supplement it with operational if we don't feel that we have enough cases at a particular score point.
Right. And I guess the term, I was using validity set and you use a different term. So
yeah. I used that term until I started this job, and our vocabulary is different.
Holdout set. I like that.
Yeah, it's a validation set, validity set. Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. So this was for quality assurance, for model acceptance, for operational scoring, and this is something that Andrew touched on. During operational scoring, we monitor in real time with human scoring the performance of the model against the human scores. We use the same metrics I showed on the previous slide. We also look very carefully at non-adjacency. We look at the actual responses when we have a non-adjacent case. We look at the model confidence, that is the error band around the prediction score. If that error band is too large, we call that a non-confidence. We send it to humans to override any scores that the machine might be assigning. We also look at the prevalence of condition codes like blanks, illegible, not in English, off topic, and see whether those are fluctuating in ways that we didn't expect based on the field test data. And in many cases, we also look at the copy detection rate. Copy detection is looking at the degree to which the response is pulling information directly from stimulus materials. Sorry, I'm stumbling on where I'm supposed to click. Okay, so to reiterate on what Andrew presented, where I'm going to talk about the quality assurance evidence that we use. I want to preface this, though, with the statement that what I'm presenting are data that are not from the same source as presented by Andrew. Specifically, when we do operational monitoring, it's coming from a system that doesn't and cannot, in many cases, use the final score that gets sent to examinees. So what Andrew presented is something that would appear in a technical manual. What I'm presenting mirrors what he does in those conversations that I have with human scoring during operational work. And then, of course, if those raise any concerns, we, as I said, immediately confer with the scoring counterparts. The things that might be missing, the types of scores that might be missing in the cases I'm looking at are where Andrew said we might do a reset. That is, we identify a human rater who's not performing very well. And after we have done our monitoring, they might decide to erase those scores and have a more expert person assign scores to them. And so his statistics might be a little higher than mine. You'll see some differences. So in 2023, our operational approach, I'm not going to spend much time here. We looked at 3 content areas: reading, social studies, and writing. We looked at a total of 44 prompts. All 3 of the content areas, 2 of the 3 content areas had some of that retrain on the fly, but it was, as you can see, it was a relatively small percentage of the total. And we assigned the predicted scores. We assigned confidence codes in the engine score. We provided condition codes and executed our copy detection algorithm. So for quality assurance, because Andrew's group focused on the percent of exact agreement and validity agreement, that's what I'm going to look at. But again, that previous slide, we consider all of those indices even during operational monitoring. So in reading, 22 of the 26 reading prompts met the exact agreement targets. 85% met the validity agreement targets. But again, before anything like resets or backreads that get overwritten, backreads that overwrite, things like that. 100% in social studies on both exact and validity agreement. And in writing, it was 92% for exact and 75% for validity, and that is on all traits. So this means that 11 of the prompts met exact agreement on all of the traits. There might have been, and I believe, I'm going from memory here, that the 1 or 2, the 3 that might be missing here, we were actually very close. So, I think we were within half of a percentage point or something like that. These are the actual numbers that we observed. So this is, again, just replicating what Andrew provided. We're looking in reading, we had a single trait. The average across the prompts of exact agreement was about 77%, and the average of the validity agreement was about 93%. That's that same type of difference that Brian observed. I do not have a validity percentage for social studies because I believe that our system combined reading and social studies because of the type of model, but we had higher exact agreement for social studies, almost 80%. Writing, this is showing each trait separately. Validity agreements range from about 85% to about 97%, and exact agreement range from about 68% to about 74%. And that is the end of my part of the presentation. I'm happy to answer additional questions if you have them.
Ed, part of the question is about possible future applications. So I really appreciate Andrew and Ed, both your really comprehensive and detailed information about what's currently being done. Is there discussion with the department or within Pearson about things that you might do differently in the future?
Andrew, I'll let you start with that.
Well, yeah, for one, as we mentioned, right now we have the any mechanics, the science and math are not being scored via the AI model. So that's something we may want to investigate in the future is, can we also do that? And this goes back to what we were talking about on the pre-equating piece in, the more we can do AI, the faster we can get results back to the schools and districts. So we're always looking for ways to do that. We know that human scoring, although I love human scoring and I've been doing human scoring forever, it is slower obviously than AI. So, we're always looking for ways that we can accelerate that. And then just, I think future application is really, is there things that this TAC can see, and maybe it's from work with other state and other TAC committees that, are there things that are being done with AI that we could incorporate into Kentucky to help out with the quality as well as in reporting?
Yeah, Phoebe.
By the time I press it, anyway, this is Phoebe Winter. This was very interesting, and I hadn't heard before in other programs of retraining on the fly. Maybe that happens, and I don't know about it, but it was interesting. And I know that some programs use some of the neurological nets and things, models that I'm not exactly sure what they are, except as a big description as opposed to primarily feature-based. And I'm not sure how that would enter in terms of better accuracy. I think it'd be really interesting to have, for context, to have things like what proportion of item or what proportion of prompts are channeled for human scoring because they're outside the confidence interval. How the confidence interval is, I'm really glad that happens because I've always been a proponent. Nothing's all or nothing, that to get the best system, you're going to have humans in there. And another thing in terms of that might be coming up in the future, I don't know, might be scoring models that can apply to multiple prompts, especially for writing. I don't know about for the other ones, so that I don't know if Pearson is looking into the possibility of using different models as we get better at writing prompts that produce that are comparable. We might be able to get that would be, I know that would be that's the holy grail, is to be able to train an engine on one and maybe tweak it for other prompts, but not have to do the human scoring all the time. Anyway, those are my just generic comments.
And Phoebe, to respond to that, yes, we monitor the low confidence, we call them low confidence engine scores. We monitor that. I don't have the statistics pulled up for Kentucky. The second part, looking at models that can be applied to multiple prompts. Actually, Virginia does that, and my predecessor coined the term mega model to refer to that. And we have some research that we've done that indicates we have minimal degradation, at least with the types of prompts that they use, when we go from a prompt-specific model to I call it prompt agnostic model. Suzanne, I think you're next.
This is Suzanne Lane. I just wanted to reiterate the need if Kentucky's going further, to the need to look at representativeness in the training model, and then to do analysis to ensure somewhat consistent accuracy across different subgroups. But when thinking about applying a general model to a subset of prompts or items, I think it's more than just seeing if it's going to work. It's, it starts from the design of the assessment. So this is more, outside of your realm, Ed, but thinking about maybe in the future, thinking about task models that capture similar skills within the content domains. And these task models might be able to generate a general scoring rubric that would potentially apply across a number of items. So I think being smart ahead of time in the design of the assessment is going to benefit when you're thinking about scoring models.
Yeah, thanks. I completely agree with that. And we are working on that right now. Corinne, I think you're next.
Yeah, I'm just piggybacking on Suzanne's comment from earlier. If you all have made it at these efforts to have a representative sample and look at the indices within subgroup or across or whatever, I would put that more front and center. I mean, I think that's a huge concern of the public. And so if you're doing those and when you are, I think that's actually some pretty quick advice you could follow up on. People are want to know that a certain culture of students or anything like that the model that you all have thought about it and worked that into your process. So I would make that more aware to the public. Yeah.
And to reassure you, yes, we are actively working on that with the customer right now, looking at the composition of demographic representation within the training set and how that influences those performance statistics after the fact by subgroup.
To what extent would that be generalizable? Because I know that for example, Sue Lottridge has done some research on their particular model and with English learners, I think, and maybe with different other variables. But because it would work with the model that their Cambium's using, would that generalize to others, or does each state need to do it for themselves, I guess is the question. Sorry, I didn't raise my...
I think that it's certainly a relevant and researchable question, how much that we can generalize. We're actually looking, I mentioned the featureizer versus transformer types models. That's one of the variables that we're considering. There's reasonable suspicion that our results are going to show that these effects are more prominent on those transformer type models, but we don't know that yet. We're not done with the work. In terms of transferability from one provider to another, I'm just hypothesizing here, but I would suppose there's probably minimal chance that there's going to be a big difference from one provider to another. We got Pete next.
Yeah, I think all of these discussions in terms of the representative of the training sample is really important, and you had mentioned that it's a simple random sample. Is that what you had said initially? Yes,
typically that's what we do. Yes.
Okay, and I'd be curious as a after the fact check to see if there was any clustering in terms of for example, schools or districts or anything of that nature, because it would seem somewhat unlikely, but you never know. And then if there is in fact some sort of clustering, then you're going to overestimate the precision that you're actually getting from your training sample. So that might be something to check. And I think the second thing in terms of moving in the future, I think it was writing, or was it only writing where you have 100% AI and human scoring?
Andrew, you might know that better than I do.
Yeah, I'm sorry, Pete. Could you repeat that? I got pulled away with a chat I shouldn't be looking at.
That's fine. I was just double checking that was it only writing that had 100% AI and human scoring, and you combined the scores?
Yes.
So it seems, and this is, obviously a state question in terms of improving the time to get results, is if you could reduce the 100% human scoring for two reasons. One, of time, of course, because as you know, that's the slowest part, and two, given the intent of human and AI scoring to have the same score, I mean, that's how we are assessing quality in some sense, then summing the score that's intended to be the same, I think is giving a false sense of robustness to that score. So I think there's some advantage to moving away from doing that mainly for the sake of speed, I think, but I think also for this false sense of creating a more reliable score.
Pete, I appreciate your observation about the clustering. That is certainly a very valid point. Corinne? You might be on mute.
Sorry, Corinne Huggins-Manley from UF. I think there's probably a really good answer to this, but off the top of my head, I'm wondering what you think. In this case, because you have these validity, samples, which were those like falsely written? Were those fake written ones to be perfect, or were they ones selected from the group of operational responses?
They're typically selected. We don't typically create them from scratch yet.
Yeah, what would be the problem? Because I assume there is one, and only using those for training. Because and while again, I'm sure there's a problem I'm just not thinking about right now. It would help with this issue that we have writ large and this type of scoring, or even in other AI applications where we're trying to get AI that mimics humans, but of course the humans have biases, right? There's always the possibility that AI could do better, but not as we always use it in this way that we do. So just looking for your thoughts on that.
Yeah. Very, very simple answer. It's availability because of the cost of obtaining them. We're paying multiple experts to read them and then assign a consensus score. So we have relatively few of them compared to the entire available pool of responses. But you're right. We prioritize those when we have them, especially for engine training. And I'm going to turn to the moderator now and say, what's the next step? Might be a break.
Yes. Thank you, KTAC members, for questions and comments. And thank you very much to Pearson colleagues for your leading us through the considerations of scoring. We do have
thanks to the TAC members, made some good questions, provided some good input. Appreciate that.
Elena?
Hi, this is Elena, and Ed, I think my mind's just spinning about a couple of things, and I was just wondering about whether there are some opportunities, if any, and I can't think of them right now, to evaluate kind of the scoring against, for example, some type of external criterion. So are there other ways to kind of think about how you're looking at these scores aside from just, for example, the human scoring piece, versus are there ways in which you could compare it against other, say, assessments that are essentially would evaluate the same latent trait, if you will, in some ways? Because do you see where I'm getting at? I'm just trying to, I'm trying to get my head around, like, do we get, like, for example, high correlations or low? And if it's low, could this be explained in some part by the use of AI or AI adjacent methods? So this is where my head's going, and I'm just having a hard time trying to think of how would you create a study that can do that? Because in some ways, it seems like there needs to be some type of external criterion to evaluate this as well. Otherwise, you're kind of just staying within the same test.
Yeah, I completely agree. I get headaches over thinking about this as well. My headache arises from the way that we do subgroup analyses. Basically, what happens is we create a bunch of statistics and then assume that the human raters have no bias. And if there's a difference, we assume that the engine is biased. And that, for me, is a bit of an insult because we don't know that. The best I've come up with at this point is to identify an external criterion in the same type of a way that we do differential item functioning analyses. So we might look at performance on the rest of the test as that conditioning variable, and then we have like a fair comparison for humans and the automated engine in terms of what looks off here. I don't have, I mean, that's a really simplistic approach in my mind. But I haven't come up with anything better yet.
I appreciate that. And, I think as this work evolves and thinking about which direction, because I think that's the question about the future direction, it almost seems like this may be something to explore in terms of how do we develop a really kind of robust external criterion to kind of take a look at this, because otherwise you are kind of having a hard time trying to disentangle where the issues really lie.
Yeah, that could be a pretty rich research agenda for somebody.
Thanks, Elena and Ed, for that important last discussion point. We will go ahead with a break now. We'll come back at the top of the hour at 2 o'clock and take up our last agenda item.
And again, TAC members, thank you very much. Good questions, good input.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank
Welcome back to the meeting of the Kentucky Technical Advisory Committee. We are the last agenda item for our meeting today, and which is a recap of the accountability standard setting that was completed this past autumn. And really it's more of a opportunity to get to KTAC feedback on the documentation since the standard settings actually completed. Although there may be opportunities to do future standard setting, and so any comments about the procedures would also be welcome. My colleagues, Chris Domaleski and Laura Pinsino, were involved in this, and they won't be joining us today, so I'll just be introducing this. The KTAC members received two types of documentation, a report and a slide presentation, both of which are in draft form, and so we appreciate any comments about that. We've talked about the procedures before. The standard setting was conducted in two different parts after our meeting. One was a PLD workshop, and then the actual cut score standard setting was done in September. The outcome of that was that the procedures went very smoothly. You may have seen the evaluations from the standard setters, which were high about almost all aspects of the standard setting. The recommended cut scores were approved by the two statutorily required bodies, the Local Superintendent Advisory Committee and the Kentucky Department of Education, and they were applied and then reported in fall of 2023. So the questions that we're inviting feedback on, as well as anything else that the KTAC members have, is what advice do you have to improve the documentation? And then if you have any advice about improving the procedures in a possible future standard setting for accountability performance standards, which are a little different than more familiar assessment standards. I should note that there was one note suggestion from the KTAC members last time, which was not reflected in the report. We're working on getting the information. That recommendation was to document that there was a range of not only demographic and geographical representation, but also representation from schools and districts that were lower performing, middle performing, and high performing. And we're working with the department to go back and get that information. That wasn't on a easily accessible form. So we're looking up the actual affiliations that people had, and then matching them with the sort of performance level of the institutions that they were with. Suzanne?
This is Suzanne Lane. I was going to mention that, Brian. My memory is terrible, so I forgot that we were discussing that before, but some form of representation to have it documented. And I think it would be useful, even the way you have it now, that you list like their responsibility, supervisor, et cetera, and in the document to have some kind of table that summarizes that information in some meaningful way so that you can get a feel for who was in it instead of looking at the entire list. I thought the document was very good, but I just wanted to respond to that particular comment at this time.
Thank you. Yeah, we realized that doing things like male, female, trying to have people guess them from the names probably wasn't a good idea. So having more of a table that summarize the different things would be helpful. So we'll do that for all the important characteristics, the representation characteristics that KTAC recommended as well. Elena?
This is Elena. I just wanted to commend you for putting this type of documentation together. And I just can't emphasize enough the importance of having something like this. I am currently working in a state where none of these decisions have been documented as far as, for example, stakeholder input, what the process was. And it's a situation where when you have a lot of turnaround at the State Department, and you have a lot of new players on, say, for example, advisory committees for accountability, because many district folks and school folks change as well, it becomes like a really handy reference point. I know that I'm speaking to the choir here, but I just wanted to emphasize how important it is, because I am now in a state where this is absent, and it's creating a lot of chaos, to be honest. And it's a difficult thing because a lot of people feel that decisions were made in a very arbitrary way. So as much as possible as the department can continue to support this type of documentation, as well as to encourage just the continuous updating of this, I think would be great. And then always ensuring that this is readily accessible to your stakeholders, so to your schools and educators who will always have questions about these things and oftentimes may think these decisions are not transparent. They can always refer back to this document as well, or maybe some highlights can be pulled out to provide a little bit more, for example, higher level information about where are some things that if you have questions about this, take a look at this section. So something along those lines. But, I just wanted to kind of commend you for having something like this really nicely laid out.
Thanks for the comment, Elena. Phoebe?
Yes, I want to emphasize Elena's comments about how well laid out this is and how good documentation it is. If I had to, I could figure out where my school was just by looking at all of this. I think one thing that would even enhance us even more is to have some kind of a flow chart kind of thing, like first you find the change, then you find first you find the status, and then you put them together, and then you put them you have to put all the togethers together maybe even with a couple of examples in there would be really useful for the user. For me, I'm really interested in knowing, and this is something I'm sure that will happen down the road as Kentucky starts implementing this, is knowing, for example, what mathematical combinations mean that no matter what you do, you are not going to get out of yellow. I mean, if you're, is there a place on status, for example, that means you're not going to be any higher than yellow? That kind of thing to illustrate how the weights actually work, you know, in terms of and how the data is mixed. Right? But again, that's down the road when you have a little more time. It's standard setting. I love it. I am really impressed on the participants' reactions to it, because this is not your mother's standard setting. It's you know, I just really appreciated how you did it and the complexity of it. How you made the complex simple, I guess.
Well, thanks for those suggestions, Phoebe. But Pete?
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I commend you as well. I think one thing that would have been a nice addition, perhaps, to your report is if you could have presented. I know this is probably a bit in the weeds, but just for consistency, you have table 2 with the colors where you have to change, and I think at the back end when you're reporting results, it would have been nice to see that same table repeated, but with results, so it kind of matches. So you have some parallelism, plus you get a sense of you have a sense of direction, and then you kind of come back around to showing us how that fills in. Just a minor point, but I think it would have been useful.
Yeah, thank you. Kevin, I don't know if there are other members in KD who may be able to address some of the response, the KTAC comments. I think the general comment is the standard setting report is helpful for public understanding. There may be other types of documentation that would be useful, things with examples or calculation, how to do the calculations actually work, or how to do the calculations on your own, or other types of things. I know that the department has also done communication around the accountability system. I don't know if there's someone from the department who might help fill in the availability of those types of materials.
So yes, Brian. So I know that I think I saw that Jennifer was on. I'm not sure if she's still on with us or not, Jennifer Stafford. But I do know that, and I see Rhonda has come on. Right. So Rhonda, if you want to chime in.
Sure. Yeah, I'm not sure about Jennifer's availability, but we have a number of things. Obviously, as we release every year, we release a lot of resources around the release, and we did a lot of pre-training. So we do have a spreadsheet where people can plug in information, and it will calculate for them the values, and so they can do kind of a what if scenario, a little bit what like Phoebe was describing. If I move this up by this percentage, what would that have meant with these cuts? And so I think that's been very helpful. We've done something like that for years. This one is just more complex with having status and change. We also got out ahead with training. So we did a number of big conferences as well as modules online, and we actually can, if the committee is just curious about some of those things, we can actually pull together some links that are out on our website that if you would like to see the kinds of things we were able to communicate out to folks, that I think helped quite a bit. I will say that to be a rather complex system and have new elements, it was a relatively smooth release. So I think we did have good success in people understanding just how the calculations worked.
Suzanne?
This is Suzanne Lane. Brian, I'm wondering, it might be in the document and I might have missed it. What percentage of the panelists were in the previous standard setting? And if you felt that was an important element to have someone that to carry over, because, you know, my second comment was going to be, this is, as everybody said, an excellent procedure, excellent documentation, and it would be great if the center and the state would present this work at CCSSO or get it out there in publication format for other states to be able to model theirs, or to use aspects of theirs, or just to see a good procedure and that's well documented. But is it, you know, I'm trying to think, you were involved in it. Are there things that are essential, you think, like the carryover of people or the nature of the people? I read one comment saying it was superintendent heavy. Did you think that you had the right mix within the panelists?
Rhonda, perhaps you can address the question about the how the panelists were recruited, not only for this 2023 panel, but for the first one in 2022.
Sure. We did look at sort of the major role groups that are most heavily involved in the assessment and accountability program. And then we wanted to balance that out with some parent representation, ethnicity representation, geographic representation from Kentucky, large school districts, small school districts. We really did a little bit of a Noah's Ark approach for a lot of groups to try to have at least 2 or 3. We had 3 panel tables, so we tried to have certain role groups across each one. There were a number of superintendents, and that developed out of the first category. And we thought it was important because there is an approval process with the local superintendent advisory group. They have approval of those cuts at the end, co-approval with KDE, that we involve members from that committee as well as some others to augment the size of districts. And then on the second, to go back to your original question, we did have quite a bit of carryover. We had asked people, would they like to remain involved in the second year? And then we reached out. Now, we had some differences where people had retired or left a role group, or so we did have some replacement, but it was a pretty high percentage of people that committed really quite a lot of time to do this work across 2 years. And I do think, you can always, I think, improve anything and maybe pull another person, but I was really impressed by the collaborative nature of the conversation, because obviously you're not going to have agreement on every aspect of everything when you bring that many people together, especially around a topic of assessment accountability. But there was a real cooperative spirit, and the center did a masterful job in pulling things together. We had a great team there at OAA that also, with just the setup and the operations of the committee and the work. And, we brought in the devices with everything preloaded on them. All of those things just try to make the meeting itself run very smoothly. So I do think we attempted to get that kind of good balance. I think, the comment on superintendents, we, obviously did have, that was the highest role group, but I think we balanced it with some, a good number of other folks with the group as well. I'll pause. I see that Jennifer is joined us. She may not be able to turn camera on, but I think she'll be able to add in as well. So Jennifer, feel free to chime in there.
Thanks, Rhonda. I was also going to mention, and I put it in chat, that we had a student from the Student Advisory Council that was highly involved as well. So we had representation from leaders, from educational leaders, and you mentioned the Noah's Ark group. But we did have students involved both in 2022 and again in 2023. And they were really actively involved and made suggestions. And the process was that if a suggestion was made, at one point we had to have 2/3 of the committee to adopt that. And the student made the recommendation, it was debated, and indeed it carried. So I was really, really excited about the student involvement.
And I believe that student received a bit of a round of applause from the rest of the committee. So it was very positive.
Yeah, it was really nice to see the students. Of course, they're outstanding people, but they participated actively. And then, as Jennifer and Rhonda mentioned, they spoke up in the group, and their contributions were recognized and accepted, which isn't always the case. Sometimes students feel like they're there, but they don't know quite what's going on, or they're sort of overwhelmed by the other personalities. Suzanne, to be specific, I think they're depending on the day, because sometimes someone had a personal thing that they had to go, so they were only there for one of the 2 days or something. I think there were about 27 panelists. I think 20 of them repeated from 2022, so it's very high percentage. People were willing to do it. They thought it was important, and even though it was hard work, I think they wanted to come back. I think it was important for them to, in this case, to repeat for two reasons. One was the system was very complex, and so we didn't do much training in the session. We did pre-training, so there was a video that went out and some other documentation, but people really needed to have some idea of understanding of what Kentucky's system was coming in. So that was true for parents and others who may not be like a DAC who dealt with it every day. So that was important. So the repeating was important. The other was as you may recall, Kentucky introduced status in 2022 and then did change in 23. One of the questions for the standard setting was, would they change the cut scores for status in 23, because they got to review them. And so it was very helpful to have people from the previous year to look at the new data and then determine whether they did want to make changes. Just in terms of complexity, this panel set over 100 cut scores in 2 days. It was a lot of work. And I think it was really helpful that they were sort of expert in accountability, the way that we expect content people to be expert in assessment proficiency standard setting. And then in terms of documentation, Alana, you know that the center does everything on Creative Commons, so all the materials are available. But the Google Forms, instructions, if you would like to use them or anyone else would like to use them in other states, those are available. We don't charge or restrict access to them. And Lily Ann, who is a summer intern with us and then worked on this project, has submitted it for a Division H AERA Publications Award this year. So we'll see whether we're trying to help make people aware of the availability of it. I did want to echo some of the KTAC members' conversation. I've been involved with a lot of creation of accountability systems for states. And as Elena said, often the performance standards are set in-house. There's a small group that says, that we're going to decide what the cut scores are that determine the things. And it's not a very public process, and as a result, it's not documented well. And so when it is public like this and documented, then I think people do feel like there's more transparency. I think there are lots of challenges to having a more public and a more involved procedure. I hope that more states would feel like Kentucky has, that the trade-offs of having it more public, more representative, and more transparent is worth the time and effort. It's not free to convene committees together to do it, but I hope that in terms of public acceptance, it pays out. And then you have all the standard setters who go back to their constituencies and can talk about the process, about it. If anyone has any comments about the documentation, other suggestions, we're glad to do that. The standard setting was completed in October in terms of approval, and so we're several months after, but we're trying to wrap that up by this next month. And so if you have any suggestions, you're free to email them to me, and Laura and Chris and I will do our best to incorporate any suggestions that you have. Suzanne?
Suzanne Lane again. I was wondering, in the survey, like thinking about future standard setting, when they're asked if they feel like the recommendations for a particular cut score were appropriate, all of them said strongly agree or agree. But just in case they don't think it is, I always like a follow-up question, and maybe you had it and it's not here because there was no disagree. It's like, do you think it should have been higher or lower, or are you not sure? You just disagree.
That's a great suggestion. I have seen a lot of evaluations for standard setting, and there usually is a confidence or a question about confidence. I think adding one about if you disagree, what would you rather have is really a good suggestion. We'll make sure that we include those in any future activities we have. Pete?
Just as something that might be interesting is to the extent that panelists are attached to specific schools, whether or not their opinion of agreeing or disagreeing with cut scores changes once they see the impact on their school. Because oftentimes people have a much broader sense of fairness and when it's not specifically tied to them.
So that would have to be between things like round 1 and round 2 with the impact. Yeah. So
that'd be after the fact more.
Okay. I think that would be an interesting research studies. Are people using the PLDs and directions, or are they being influenced by sort of personal knowledge about things that they're involved in as well? Yeah, great suggestion. Because we've covered this topic before, if there aren't other suggestions about this, we'll go ahead and we'll be able to end earlier today. In terms of future meetings, the department and KTAC members talked about other dates that, since our original dates didn't work, and there were dates that everyone agreed on. They are March 28 and October, which is a Thursday, and October 10, which is a Tuesday. And so if the KTAC members could hold those days, and as a placeholder, we'll do the same time frame that we had for these 11 a.m. to 5 p.m. Eastern. As you've seen, we've ended early both times, and so it'll be dependent on the agenda items. So we have dates March 28, June 12 and 13, and October 10. We'll get details to you as soon as we can about those. And if you have any suggestions about future agenda items, those would be appreciated as well. We've talked about, for example, the technical documentation which is being produced for the systems, and we've intended to bring those forward to the TAC, but haven't done that yet. Phoebe?
Yeah, I just want to acknowledge what you said, and that is that I really want to see the technical documentation and details of test design and things like that, because I think we give pretty good advice in the abstract, but it might even be better with a concrete thing.
Suzanne?
Brian, I indicated I couldn't be available October 10th, but it's fine if everybody else is. I didn't know if you got my email or.
You did, and I may have misaligned the my check marks with the things. So
if everybody else can, don't. I just wasn't sure if you received it.
No, I did. I think it's my messy handwriting. I didn't get the rows and columns aligned. So I'm sorry. I'll make sure that I go back and check and find a date that does work. And then, just as a note, Phoebe is retiring before the October meeting, so we'll see if there's a replacement not a replacement, but a new KTAC member that the department would like to involve and make sure the schedule works with that person as well. Suzanne, I apologize. I should have double checked, and I thought I did, but I did it wrong.
No problem. It's nice to know that others make these mistakes, because I always do.
That's the problem with doing it handwritten instead of in my Excel spreadsheet. So, or with my, we could have done a poll. So I'll confirm just right after this with KTAC members in the department about the October date. Is there anything else that people would like to bring up? If not, Kevin, we'll turn the time back over to you and see if there's anything from the department to.
Nothing that, Brian, that I can think of other than we are very appreciative of the TAC members, not just the past 2 days, but every time that you're able to come together and provide your expertise and advice and definitely your deeper level of thinking and support of the ideals and great recommendations. We're very appreciative of that. I know that these meetings can be long and we require a lot more of your time of reviewing the materials and things in advance. And so we are very appreciative of that on behalf of the department and myself. Also, the presenters over the past 2 days, we had a great group of presenters. They were definitely prepared and had some great topics to discuss, and you guys give them some wonderful questions. So I can't think of a better way to end a 2-day meeting like this. Very, very appreciative of all of you, and Brian for always doing an upstanding job leading these meetings. Couldn't be happier. So I don't know if Rhonda or anyone else has anything to add before we part ways.
No, we just appreciate each of you, and may you stay warm through this winter season, or at least have good weather safety. Everybody's a little jealous of Florida's position right now. But thank you all so very much. Have a great rest of your day.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Appreciate everybody.
All right.